First of all, thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to Sandy and the Foundation for inviting me. The book Pat and Dick literally came out on Tuesday, and this is the first talk I'm giving on it. And I wanted to say on a personal note that it is devoted and dedicated to my three wonderful grandchildren, Emerson, Piper, and Cole, and their very loving parents. And I also want to say that I'm delighted that my cousin Bill Swift and his family is here today to celebrate with us. I want to dedicate this talk to Julie and Tricia and Ed and David, who deserve to see their parents treated fairly. I think that Sandy has told me that the theme for this coming year is taking a new look at Richard Nixon. And that's a great context in which for me to tell you about this book, because by telling the story of Richard Nixon through the humanizing perspective of his wife and his marriage, his strengths are clarified and his weaknesses are put in a new perspective. In 1948, when Richard Nixon was a member of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he was investigating Alger Hiss for communism, he never dreamed that 24 years later, he would be in China, opening China to the West. It's extraordinary when you take a life journey and you have a sense of adventure in your heart and curiosity and openness and follow what's emerging rather than keep to a rigid path, what changes you can make. And I have a confession to make to you all today along that line. In 1969, I was a graduate student at the University of Texas in Austin. And what do you think I was doing? I was protesting the Vietnam War and Richard Nixon. And on that day, I had no idea that I would be here today celebrating Richard Nixon and his marriage. So things do change. You know, as a psychologist, I bring a unique perspective to this, as well as a historian and a biographer, because I've been working, believe it or not, I've been working for doing marital therapy with couples since 1970. That's a long time. And one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is long-term marriages and all that they shift and go through. So you think of a couple in courtship, they're like this. And over the period of a marriage, one person individuates and becomes interested in new developing careers and things, and they move away apart. And then the other partner moves off to something else, and there's a dance and a rhythm in a relationship. And I think that we see this in the Nixon marriage. And I would like to maintain that too many people see the Nixon marriage through the lens of Watergate. And that's simply not a fair and accurate lens to see a 53-year relationship. So I'm going to talk about three main myths that still crop up about the Nixons and their marriage, and I'm going to tell you some of the things I found. One of the things I'm not going to be able to have time to do is to tell you about the the wonderful relationship with the Eisenhowers, which is much better than people say, but you can read that in the book. So one of the myths about Richard Nixon is that he was a cold or uncaring husband. And I think one of the things that I found is that he was very sentimental. In 1944, on the 6th anniversary of meeting Pat, he wrote her a letter from the South Pacific in which he said, "Your birthday is today, and I'm going to celebrate all your birthdays as a remembrance of our happiness and my love for you." And he always followed through on that. And I was told a wonderful story by Lucy Winchester, the social secretary in the White House. In March 1969, when Richard Nixon was besieged by all the things he had to do in the Vietnam War, he called Lucy into a meeting, and she had no idea what he was going to say. It was also always a little nervous to meet the president and see what he's up to. And he said, "We are going to throw a surprise birthday party for Pat. And I am going to tell you in exact detail how I planned it. She is going to enter, and she's going to stand at the north end of the East Room. And he went through all the details, and he proceeded to get so excited that he began to sing Happy Birthday, and he sang the entire song Happy Birthday as if he were the band and conducting the birthday right then. And that showed what great enthusiasm he had for celebrating his wife. And interesting enough, he didn't care much about celebrating his own birthday. And so that was, I think, a very interesting insight that I got into him. And the other thing that I think is very important is to see some of the letters he wrote her during the war. I just want to quote a few of them because there's a tender aspect to Richard Nixon's heart. And Frank Gannon interviewed him a number of years ago, and Frank said, "What's written on your heart?" In a split second, he said, "Pat." There was no hesitation. So this is what he wrote her at a couple points during the war. "I'm certainly not the Romeo type. I may not say much when I'm with you, but all of me loves all of you all the time." Pat, whose nickname for her husband was Plum, wrote back at 2 o'clock in the morning, "I just had to write you to say how very much I love you." She had seen a movie, but told him, "I miss Plum's hand very much." In 1943, he was in a Quonset hut, and he wrote her on their third anniversary, "I'm thinking of our years together and loving you every minute of the time." Then thinking about his wife's wartime job in San Francisco at the Office of Price Administration, he wrote her, "I'm really very proud, as I've always been. I like to tell the guys how smart you are, as well as being the most attractive person they'll ever see. Dear heart, you are the tops. Small wonder that I have no other interest but you." And one other example. In early 1944, he wrote, "Dear one, what fun we could have on a farm." He wrote her, "Dogs, horses, snow, and somebody to do the work. Whatever it is, whatever you do, it will be wonderful to be with you again. I love you so very, very much this minute." This is a tenderness that you don't often hear about. I want to take you back to the beginning of their courtship to give you another view on that. And Frank Gannon, who has wonderful expressions, said that Richard Nixon was the man who thought he had no game but had won the hot girl. And that's basically how he thought of it all his life. So I want to read you just briefly from the book to give you a feel in January 1938 when they met, where they were. The first year of their courtship was very uneven. And Pat was much more grounded, and she really had a sense of happiness in her professional life. She was in her first year teaching at Whittier High School, teaching business, and she'd had a sense of privation and a lot of sacrifice in her family life after her parents died, and she wasn't ready to get married or really involved with someone. So I want to just read briefly. "Miss Ryan was a sophisticated modern woman. Lithe and graceful, she wore fashionable skirts with bright blouses and sweaters that set off her luxuriant red gold hair, her fresh complexioned face, and her high cheekbones. And she wore lavender perfume. Student Robert Blake remembered that Miss Ryan was quite a dish. You could kid around with her, Virginia Endicott remembered, but there was always that fine line you do not cross. Beneath her accommodating demeanor lay a steely fortitude, forged from years of hardship, toil, and unstinting effort to better herself. And this is the part I love. Suddenly, junior and senior boys were becoming interested in learning how to type. They were signing up for a typing class. This was the first. Many teenage boys in her class developed infatuations, while female students developed schoolgirl crushes on her. Young Pac Ryan was discovering the price of glamour in a dull community. She was being wooed to the point of harassment by her many admirers, including her students. Some of the boys in her class placed a small query in the student paper asking where she lived and were able to locate her apartment. They followed her to the one stucco bungalow court where she lived on Hadley Street across from the bowling alley. Summoning up their nerve, they knocked on her door, but they received a mighty cool reception from Miss Ryan, who was not only intent on maintaining her professional demeanor, but preternaturally guarded, even secretive. Groups of girls staked out her apartment, eager to flesh out the fantasies of her exhilarating life. One evening, in an eerie harbinger of the intrusive intention that would become commonplace in the public life of Mrs.